The room at the Drake Hotel on 4th Street was small enough that a tall man could touch both walls if he stretched, and Silas Mercer had never once asked for a bigger one. He sat on the edge of a bed that sagged in the middle, a travel iron balanced on a folded towel beside him, pressing the collar of a shirt he had owned for 9 years. The shirt was a plain blue cotton, soft at the cuffs from washing, and he worked the iron along the seam the way his mother had taught him. Slow with the grain, no shortcuts. When the collar lay flat, he held the shirt up to the lamp, turned it once, and nodded to nobody. His boots stood by the door. They were good boots, brown leather, resoled twice, the heels worn down on the outside edge the way a working man's heels wear. A valet at a place like the one he was driving to tonight would glance at those heels and make a decision about the man wearing them, and Silas knew it, and he had decided a long time ago that he did not mind. He had started with less than these boots were worth. 17 years old, a borrowed flatbed truck with a temperamental clutch and a single contract hauling restaurant linens across the river and back. He had slept in the cab that first winter to save the rent. He still remembered the particular cold of a truck cab at 4 in the morning, the way your own breath fogged the windshield from the inside, and he had promised himself somewhere in that cold that whatever he built, he would not forget the floor he was building it up from. 24 years later, the company had 900 trucks, and his name was on none of them, because he'd named it Crossroads instead. The place, his ma said, a person's whole life gets decided, not at the top of the hill or the bottom, but at the spot where you choose which way to turn. On the nightstand sat a small tin music box, no bigger than his palm, dented on one corner where it had been dropped on a kitchen floor in 1991. He picked it up. He wound the little brass key 3 half-turns, no more, because more than 3 and the spring strained, and his mother had always said, "You don't ask a thing to give you more than it has." The lid lifted on its hinge and a thin waltz climbed out into the small room, 6 or 7 notes, tinny and sweet, before it slowed and bent flat and stopped. He let it sit there in his hand a moment after the music died. Then he closed the lid and set it in the inside pocket of his jacket, over his chest, the way another man might carry a watch. He was 41 years old and worth a little more than $3 billion, and not one soul at the gala he was about to attend knew his face. That was the way he wanted it tonight. 3 weeks earlier, a quiet phone call had reached him in a truck stop outside Dayton, where he still liked to eat eggs at the counter at 6 in the morning the way he had when he drove freight himself. The call was from a woman who sat on the board of an arts trust he had been funding for 6 years, always through a holding company, never his name. She told him carefully, the way people tell you something they aren't sure they're allowed to say, that money he had set aside for a small free music program on the west side of the city was about to be quietly moved somewhere else. A new wing, a donor's name on a marble wall. She wasn't certain. She thought he should know. Silas had thanked her, paid for his eggs, and driven home thinking about it the whole way. He could have sent a lawyer. He had a great many lawyers, and any one of them could have ended the matter with a single letter on heavy paper. But Silas had learned something over 24 years that no lawyer could do for him, which was this: you find out who people are by watching them when they think nobody who matters is in the room. So he had not sent a letter. He had bought a ticket under the holding company's name, ironed a 9-year-old shirt, and decided to go see for himself. The Eden Park Music Hall sat on a bluff above the Ohio River, on the eastern edge of Cincinnati, a brick and limestone building from 1878, arched windows and a portico held up by columns the color of old cream. Inside, the air smelled of floor wax and candle smoke and the particular dust that lives in velvet curtains 100 years old. Crystal chandeliers hung over a parquet floor laid in a herringbone pattern, and a 12-piece orchestra was tuning at the far end, the cello finding its low note and holding it while the violins climbed past. Silas came in through a side door because the side door was closer to where he had parked his truck, and a young man in a server's vest, no more than 20, was leaning against the wall there whistling something off-key and cheerful. The young man straightened when he saw Silas, looked at the worn boots and the plain blue shirt, and relaxed again. "Coats and deliveries through the back, sir," the young man said, not unkindly. "You with the caterer?" Silas could have said a number of things. He looked at the kid's hopeful, tired face, the face of somebody working a Saturday night for an hourly wage, and he felt no urge at all to correct him. "Just here to look around," Silas said. "Suit yourself." The young went back to whistling. Across the lobby, a man in a charcoal suit caught sight of Silas and crossed the marble with a steady, deliberate stride. He was 60, maybe more, broad through the shoulders in a waist that suits don't quite hide, with the short, clean haircut of a man who had stood at attention a long time ago and never entirely stopped. His name tag read W. Prior, Operations. He stopped in front of Silas and something moved behind his eyes, a recognition he caught and folded away before it could finish. "Evening," Wendell Pryor said. He lowered his voice. "Sir?" The word was quiet, and it was meant to stay quiet. Silas gave him the smallest shake of the head, a man asking another man to keep a thing between them, and Wendell understood the way some men understand each other without much being spent on it. He had run the building's operations for 11 years. He knew who had paid 3 winters ago and without a single line in the newspaper to tear out the old stone steps at the river entrance and build a ramp wide and gentle enough that nobody come up it would ever have to ask for help. He knew, and he had been asked never to say, and Wendell Pryor was a man who kept what he was asked to keep. "Anything you need," Wendell said. "You find me." "I will," Silas said. "Thank you, Wendell." He drifted along the edge of the room the way he liked to, hands loose at his sides, taking the measure of a thing before it took the measure of him. The guests were arriving in 2s and 3s, men in dark suits and women in dresses that cost more than the truck outside, and they moved past him without seeing him, which was the entire point. A waiter offered him a tray and then, registering the boots, withdrew it. A woman handed him her empty glass to hold. Silas held it until a real server came by and then set it gently on the tray. None of it touched him. He had grown up invisible in rooms like this, on the other side of the swinging kitchen door, and a man does not forget the floor he came up from, no matter how high the ceiling gets. It was near the river entrance, by the wide, gentle ramp, that he first saw her. A woman in a deep green dress was coming up the ramp in a wheelchair, moving herself with 2 strong, even pushes. When the front caster dropped into the gap where 2 old boards had shrunk apart over a century of winters, the chair stopped hard. She did not cry out. She did not look around for help. She set her jaw, rocked back to lift the small wheel free, and the board gap caught it again, and Silas was already kneeling before he had decided to. "Don't lift the back," he said, quiet, his hands going to the gap and not to her chair. "It's the seam. Half a second." He pressed the warped board flat with the heel of his hand and held it there. Now she pushed. The caster rolled clean over and onto the smooth floor of the lobby. She came to a stop and turned to look at him, and Silas saw a woman, maybe 34, with dark eyes, took him in fast and gave nothing back. A quick and careful intelligence that had clearly been offered help one too many times by people who wanted to feel good about giving it. "I had it," she said. "You did," Silas agreed and stood and stepped back to give her room. "Board's been loose since before I got here. Wasn't your wheel." Something in how he said it, the matter of fact in it, the absence of any soft pity, made her look at him a second time. "You with the building?" "Just here to look around," he said again. "That makes one of us. A dry edge under it, almost a smile but not spent on him yet. I'm here to be thanked." She said the word thanked the way another person might say a word they'd bitten into and found sour. Then she pushed past him into the crowd, easy and upright, and was gone among the green dresses and the gray suits. Silas watched her go and did not yet know her name. He was still watching the place where she disappeared, when a voice cut across the lobby, pitched to carry. The voice of a man who has never in his life worried whether he was being too loud. "You, yes, you, with the boots." A tall man in his 50s, silver at the temples, a glass of something amber already in his hand, was pointing at Silas across 10 feet of marble. Preston Walcott had the kind of face that looked carved for a coin, and the kind of certainty that comes from never once being told no by anyone whose opinion he counted. Don't just stand there. We've got chairs and that. He flicked two fingers toward the ramp, toward where the woman in green had been, that wheelchair business clogging the entrance. Get the floor clear. We've photographs at 8. Silas looked at him for a moment. Sure, he said. Walcott had already turned away, lowering his voice to the young assistant at his elbow, though not low enough. And tell Dwyer the Hale allocation moves Monday. The full 1.2. I want it in the Heritage Wing line before the quarter closes, before anyone on the board starts asking tender questions about whose name goes on the door. He sipped his drink. It's a music class in a church basement, for God's sake. The donor will never miss it. He walked off toward table 1, and the assistant scurried after him, and Silas stood very still in the middle of the lobby with the empty space, where a woman in a green dress had been, and the music box a small, cold weight over his heart. Across the room, half hidden behind a stone column, the woman had been parked by no choice of her own, neat and out of the way, where the photographs would not have to include her. She had her hands folded in her lap. She was looking at nothing. Silas slipped one hand into his jacket and closed it around the dented tin. That, he thought, the way they walk around her, that is what I came here to see. By the time Silas Mercer was 8 years old, he already knew how to do 3 things most grown men never learn. He could iron a shirt without scorching the yolk. He could carry a pot of boiling water across a crowded kitchen without spilling a drop. And he could dance. The dancing was his mother's doing. Della Mercer had used a wheelchair since the year before Silas was born. A drunk driver on the 6th Street Viaduct, a wet October night. A young woman who had been walking home from a double shift at the cannery. That was the whole story. And Della told it maybe twice in her life, both times in the same flat voice she used for the weather. She did not care to be a sad story. She had decided that a long time ago, somewhere in the long gray months of learning her own new body, and she had come out the other side of it harder and funnier and more stubborn than the woman who went in. Their apartment on Baymiller Street was 3 rooms over a shuttered shoe repair, and the kitchen was the warm heart of it. The stove kept the cold out. The window over the sink looked down on an alley where cats fought, and a neighbor grew tomatoes in a bucket. And on the chipped enamel table sat a small tin music box that Della's own mother had carried up from Tennessee, dented on one corner from a drop neither of them had been alive to witness. On the bad nights, the nights the bills were spread on the table like a hand of cards nobody could win, the nights the radiator knocked and gave no heat, Della would reach over and wind that little box 3 half turns. Nevermore. You don't ask a thing to give you more than it's got, she'd say, and the thin waltz would climb out into the kitchen, and she would hold out both her arms to her son. Come here, baby, dance with me. You can't dance, Mama. He'd said it once, only once when he was 6, and the world was very literal. She had looked at him with one eyebrow up, the look that could stop him at 40 paces for the rest of his life. Says who? And she had taken his small hands in hers and set them on the armrests of her chair, and she had shown him how to lean, how to turn the chair on its own axis, slow, with the music, so the whole thing became a thing with a center and a sweep to it, how to let the wheels draw a circle on the linoleum, the way another couple drew one with their feet. She did the turning. He did the leaning. Between the two of them, in a kitchen 10 feet wide, they made something that was, unmistakably, a dance. She would keep him at it past his bedtime on those nights, and he understood much later that the dancing was never only for him. It was how she kept a door open inside herself that the world kept trying to close. A woman who can dance in her own kitchen is not a woman the world has finished with, no matter what the world has decided. There's 100 ways to be left standing at the edge of a room, Silas, she told him, one of those nights, her hands warm and certain on his. Folks'll do it to you your whole life. Decide you can't before you've had a chance to. The trick isn't getting them to let you in. She turned the chair a slow quarter. The trick is you build your own floor, and you make sure there's room on it for whoever they left outside. He had been too young that night to know he'd been handed the thing he would carry the rest of his life. but he never forgot the shape of it, the way you never forget a song you learned before you could read. "It isn't what you're handed to carry," she would say, the same words every time, smoothing his collar before school. "It's how you carry it, and who you carry it for." Della Mercer had been gone 19 years now. The tin box rode over her son's heart in the inside pocket of a 9-year-old jacket, in a music hall on a bluff above the river, while 300 of the wealthiest people in Ohio drank champagne and did not see him at all. It is a strange thing, how invisible a person can become. More than 1 in 4 American adults lives with a disability of some kind, over 70 million people, the kind of number that should be impossible to overlook. And trouble with walking is among the most common of all. And yet a room like this one had a way of arranging itself so that the woman in the green dress was always somehow behind a column, off to the side in the soft, blurred edge of the photograph where the eye is trained not to land. Silas had spent his whole life watching rooms that, to his mother, to the bus boys and the coat-check girls and the old men who swept the floors after everyone went home, to himself before the money. The money had not changed what he saw. It had only changed whether he had to stay quiet about it, and tonight, by his own choosing, he was staying quiet a while longer. He moved along the wall, a glass of water he hadn't touched in his hand, and let the evening tell on itself. Near the orchestra, the woman in green had found better company than the column. An old woman, easily 80, sat beside her in a high-backed chair, wrapped in a shawl the color of claret, and the two of them were laughing about something with the unguarded ease of people who have just discovered they like each other. The old woman's hands moved when she talked, graceful, deliberate, the hands of someone who had once been taught that hands were part of speech. 40 years I taught movement in this city, she was saying as Silas drifted within earshot. And I will tell you, the finest dancer I ever laid eyes on never once stood up to do it. Heaven, she was something. She didn't dance in spite of the chair, you understand. She danced with it, made the rest of us look like we were just walking around to music. The woman in green tilted her head. What happened to her? Oh, I lost track of her, the way you do. The old woman's face went soft and far away. Long time ago now. But I think about those hands of hers most every day of my life. She patted the younger woman's arm. You've got a little of it, you know. The way you hold yourself. I noticed it the second you came in. Silas stood very still by the wall. He did not yet let himself finish the thought. He had learned not to reach for things too fast. Reaching scared them off. But something had turned over quietly in his chest, the way a key turns, and he stayed there a moment longer than he meant to, watching an old woman's hands draw shapes in the air over a parquet floor. He would learn her name within the hour. Adelaide Cruz. He would learn before the night was over exactly which dancer she had never forgotten, and why, and the knowing would take the legs out from under him. But that was still ahead. For now there was only the slow accumulation of an ordinary evening's cruelty, gathering the way weather gathers. If you've ever sat at the edge of a room and watched the world arrange itself to leave you out of the picture, this story is going to feel familiar. And if it's reaching you, take a second to subscribe, because we tell stories like Odessa's every week for people exactly like you. At table 1, Preston Walcott was working the room the way he worked everything, which was to say he was being generous with his attention to the people who could do something for him and economical with it everywhere else. Silas watched him lean toward a thin, nervous man with a leather folio. Dwyer, the assistant, had called him, and watched Dwyer nod and write something down. What Dwyer wrote, though Silas could not see it, was a date. What the two of them were settling, in the low, murmuring tones of men who believe a thing is decided, was a single line buried on page 11 of a 40-page funding agreement, a line Walcott himself had asked the lawyers to add 8 months ago. It granted the chairman of the board sole discretion to reallocate program funds in the interest of the trust's strategic priorities. It was the kind of sentence that looks like nothing. It was the kind of sentence that exists for exactly one reason, which is to let one man move other people's money without having to ask the room. The money in question kept the lights on at a free music and movement class in the basement of a church on the west side. 10 years it had run. Close to 2,000 children had come through its doors. Kids whose parents worked nights, kids who'd never have touched a piano otherwise, kids in wheelchairs who had been told, gently and often, that some rooms simply weren't built for them. The woman who ran it took no salary worth the name. Walcott had described it earlier to a developer he wanted to impress as a hobby that's outlived its usefulness. He meant to move its funding into a marble-clad addition that would carry a major donor's name on the door, and the contractor for that addition would be, through 2 holding companies and a cousin's signature, Walcott Development. He did not think of this as theft. This was the thing Silas understood about men like Walcott, the thing that made them so much more dangerous than the loud and obvious villains. Walcott genuinely believed he was the adult in the room. He believed that money flowed naturally toward importance and that he was simply helping it along. The children in the church basement were not real to him. They were a line item, and a line item feels nothing when you move it. The woman who ran that class was at this moment 30 feet from the man dismantling her life's work, and she had just found out. Silas saw it happen. He saw Dwyer rise from table 1 and cross toward the bar, and he saw the woman in green intercept him, not timidly, not hat in hand, but rolling straight into his path with the directness of someone who had stopped, years ago, waiting politely to be addressed. "Mr. Dwyer." Her voice carried just enough. "I've left 3 messages with the trust office this week about the spring allocation. Nobody's called me back. I'd like to know why I'm hearing from a parent, Mr. Dwyer, that our funding's under review." Dwyer's face did the thing that faces do. "Mrs. Hale, this really isn't. It really is, though. Calm, unmovable. 40 kids are registered for the spring term. 6 of them use chairs. I had to fight this building for 2 years to get a ramp those kids could use to come hear a concert. And now I'm hearing the money that teaches them is being reviewed." So is it. So that was her name, Hale, the Hale allocation, the 1.2, the music class in a church basement, for God's sake. Silas Mercer stood against the wall with an untouched glass of water in his hand and felt the whole evening click into a single terrible focus, like a lens turning until the blur resolves. The woman whose front wheel he had freed at the door, the dancer Adelaide Cruz, could see a ghost of. The line item Preston Walcott meant to erase on Monday morning. They were all one person, and her name was Odessa Hale, and she had no idea, none at all, that the money she was fighting for had been put there, 6 years ago and without a name attached, by the man in the worn boots she'd told at the door that she'd had it, thanks all the same. Dwyer escaped toward the bar. Odessa held her place a moment, her hands tight on the wheel rims, her chin level. Then, because a room was watching, and she would not give it the satisfaction, she let her shoulders down, turned the chair in a slow, controlled arc, and rolled back toward the old woman in the claret shawl as though nothing at all had happened. Up on the little dais by the orchestra, a microphone gave its short electric cough. Preston Walcott was rising, buttoning his jacket, lifting a glass, ready to spend 4 practiced minutes thanking the right people. Somewhere in those 4 minutes, folded thin and said fast, would be a sentence about our community partners, and a woman in a green dress would be handed a small framed certificate and a smattering of applause, and the room would feel generous and move on. Silas set his glass down on the nearest tray. He had seen now what he came to see. The question was what he was going to do about it, and the night was about to make him answer. The certificate, when it came, took less than a minute. Preston Walcott stood at the dais with the ease of a man who had given 1,000 of these speeches, and he thanked the donors who mattered first by name, lingering on each one the way you linger over a friend. He thanked the symphony's board. He thanked the caterer, which got a warm laugh. And then, near the end, in the tone a man uses for the bottom of a list, he said, "We're also proud, of course, to recognize our community partners, the folks doing the small, good work out there in the neighborhood." He glanced at a card Miss Odessa Hale of the West End music program. "Odessa, stand well." A flicker of something crossed his face, gone too fast to be sure of, and a few people at the front tables went still. "Come on up, won't you?" Or, "We'll bring it to you." Round of applause. The applause was the kind that dies before it finds its feet. A young man in a trust polo crossed the floor with a small framed certificate and bent to hand it to Odessa where she sat. She took it. She said thank you, clearly, to the room, though the room had already turned back to its drinks. She looked at the certificate in her lap for a moment. Cheap frame, the kind that comes a dozen to a box, her name spelled with 2 L's. And then she set it face down on the table beside her, gently the way you set down something you have decided not to feel anything about. Adelaide Cruz beside her was not so disciplined. The old woman's mouth had gone thin, and her eyes had gone bright, and she reached over and gripped Odessa's wrist with a hand that still had a dancer's strength in it. That, she said, low, was disgraceful. That, Odessa said, was Tuesday. She managed something close to a smile. You get used to the temperature of a room after a while. This one's been telling me what it is since I came up the ramp. The orchestra lifted into a waltz then, the real dancing finally beginning, and couples drifted out onto the parquet in their dark suits and bright dresses, and the chandeliers threw their soft gold light down on shoulders and bare arms and the slow turning of the floor. It was beautiful. That was the thing Silas would remember. It was genuinely, achingly beautiful, and it was happening around Odessa Hale the way a river happens around a stone, and she sat at the edge of it with a face arranged to show none of what it cost. Adelaide would not let it lie. She caught the sleeve of a passing man, silver-haired, pleasant, somebody's husband. "Gerald, Gerald, do an old woman a kindness and ask my friend here to dance." Gerald looked down at Odessa and at the chair, and his pleasant face filled up with apology. "Oh, I'd love to, truly, but I've got 2 left feet even with the standing kind." He laughed to soften it. "You'd be taking your life in your hands." And he was gone, into the music, with a woman whose feet apparently posed no such danger. "Don't," Odessa said quietly. Adelaide had already flagged another, a younger man this time, broad, confident. "You there, yes. Would you partner my friend for this one?" The young man's eyes did a quick circuit, the chair, the room, who was watching, and landed on the safe answer. "I promised this one to my wife, ma'am." Maybe later? There would be no later. He found his wife with visible relief. "Adelaide, please, stop." But the old woman's blood was up now, and she asked a third, a tall man by the bar, who suddenly remembered a phone call and stepped out onto the terrace to take it, where he stood scrolling through nothing at all. And a fourth, who smiled and said, "Next song, I promise," with the easy lie of a man who knew the song would end, and another would start, and he would be safely elsewhere. By the third refusal, the table nearest them had noticed. By the fourth, the noticing had become its own small entertainment. The careful not looking, the woman who leaned to murmur to her husband, the quick-covered smile of a girl who would have been mortified to be caught at it and was enjoying it anyway. The cruelty of the room was not in anything anyone said. No one said anything cruel. The cruelty was in the smooth, practiced ease with which 300 people declined, all at once and without coordinating it, to let one woman be a woman for the length of a single song. Adelaide, Odessa's voice had changed. It was very steady and very low, and it left no room. "Look at me. I need you to stop asking. I mean it. I will not sit here while you collect no from every man in this building on my behalf. I came tonight on my own. I'll leave on my own. Do not ask one more person to do me the favor of touching me." She drew a breath. "I have spent my whole life being somebody's good deed. I would rather sit out every dance until I die than be one more." Adelaide's eyes filled. She let go of the neck sleeve before she'd caught it. "Oh, my girl," she whispered. I know what you wanted." Odessa reached over and squeezed the old hand, gentler now. "It's the kindest thing anyone's done for me all night. That's what makes it hurt." She turned her face back toward the floor, toward all that turning light, and she folded her hands in her lap, and she went still. A waiter passed, and the candle flames bent in his wake and stood up straight again. Somewhere a glass touched a glass with a small, bright sound. The waltz climbed toward its turn. Odessa Hale sat at the edge of the most beautiful room in the city and watched it dance without her. and the only sign of anything at all was her hands, which had gone white at the knuckles, where they gripped each other. Against the far wall, Silas Mercer slid his hand into his jacket and closed his fingers around the small tin music box. He did not feel brave. He wanted that understood, later, when people made it into something. He did not feel like a man crossing a room to make a point. He felt his mother's hands on his at the kitchen table. He felt the dent in the tin under his thumb, the same dent that had been there when he was 8, and the radiator wouldn't heat, and she'd wound it 3 half turns and held out her arms. There's 100 ways to be left standing at the edge of a room. The trick is you build your own floor. He had spent 24 years and $3 billion building floors, and here was a woman sitting at the edge of one of them, and the only question his mother had ever taught him to ask was the only question that mattered now. Does somebody need you? A server he didn't know pressed a folded white cloth and a tray into his hands, mistaking him for staff one last time. Silas looked at the cloth. Then he set it down on the nearest table, unhurried, and he set the tray down beside it, and he squared the cuffs of his 9-year-old shirt, and he started across the floor. People felt it before they understood it. That was the strange thing. A man in worn boots walking across a ballroom should have drawn no eyes at all, and yet heads turned as he passed, one and then another, the way a field of wheat leans when a wind crosses it that you cannot yet feel on your own face. A woman lowered her glass. A man stopped mid-sentence. Nobody knew what they were watching. They only knew the way a room sometimes knows, that they were watching something. Preston Walcott knew only that one of the help was walking the wrong way across his floor. He stepped into the aisle between the tables, smooth and certain, a host, correcting a small error. Hey, you. He kept his voice low, a man too important to shout. Wrong direction, friend. Whatever she needs, send a server. We don't have staff wandering the floor during the... He's not staff. Wendell Pryor had come from somewhere near the orchestra, and he placed himself in the space between Walcott and the floor, with the unhurried bulk of a man who had spent a career standing exactly where he meant to stand. He did not raise his voice. He did not touch anyone. He simply occupied the path and looked at Preston Walcott with the flat, patient eyes of a man for whom this developer in a good suit was not, and had never been, the most dangerous thing he'd faced on a Saturday night. Wendell. Walcott's jaw tightened. I don't know what you think you're, Mr. Walcott. Quiet, almost gentle. I've run this building 11 years. I'd ask you to let the gentleman pass, and I'd ask you to do it without making this the thing everyone remembers about your evening. A beat. I think you'll want to take that advice. I truly do. Something in the old soldier's certainty got through where an argument never would have. Walcott looked from Pryor to the man in the boots, now most of the way across the floor, and for the first time that night, a thread of doubt worked its way into his face. The unease of a man who has stepped onto ground he assumed was solid, and felt it give. He did not step aside exactly. He simply failed to keep blocking the way, which amounts to the same thing, and tells you everything about the kind of man he was. Silas did not look at either of them. He had eyes only for the woman by the table with her name spelled wrong on a certificate turned face down, and he crossed the last of the distance, and he did the thing his mother had taught him to do at altars and at bedsides and at kitchen tables on cold nights. He did not bend down from the waist, the way you bend to a child. He lowered himself. He went down on one knee beside the wheelchair, slow and easy until his eyes were level with hers, until she was not looking up at one more person looking down. Odessa turned and found his face there, at her own height, and her dark eyes narrowed. Not in fear, but in the wary recognition of a woman who had learned to read an approach the way a sailor reads weather. You, she said, the man from the door. Who said he was just here to look around? That's me, Silas said. If this is you about to be the hero who dances with the sad woman in the chair so the whole room can dab its eyes, her voice was low and even and entirely without self-pity, you can save us both the trouble. I've had a lifetime of being someone's better self. I'm not interested in being yours. No, Silas said. That's fair. That'd be its own kind of cruel. He let the cat sit a second. I'm not asking you so the room can feel something. I don't much care what this room feels. I'm asking because my mother used a chair her whole life, and she taught me to dance in a kitchen 10 feet wide, and she'd never once let me leave a floor I had any say over with somebody good sitting at the edge of it. That's the whole reason. There isn't a better one, and I'm not going to invent one. Odessa said nothing, but something had shifted, some careful door come off its latch. My name's Silas, he said. I don't know how to do this, so it'll mean anything to you yet. So I'll just ask, and you can tell me no, and I'll go stand back against that wall, and not one person in this room will know I tried. He held out his hand, palm up, not reaching for her, just offering, open, level, hers to take or leave. Mrs. Hale, would you dance with me? The candle flames bent and stood. The waltz turned over into its second phrase. 300 people, without admitting to themselves that they were doing it, had stopped to watch as a man in worn boots kneel beside a wheelchair, with his hand open and empty between them. And Odessa Hale looked at that open hand for a long, long moment, while the old fear and the old armor fought it out with something she had stopped letting herself want years ago. If you've ever been the one no one asked to dance, if you've ever sat at the edge of your own life and waited for a hand that never came, then you already know what it costs her to reach. Stay with us and subscribe, because what she does next is the reason this whole story exists. Her hand came up off the wheel rim slowly, the way something rises from deep water, and it settled into his. One dance, Odessa said, and if you make it into a sermon, I will run over your foot. Yes, ma'am, Silas said, and something in his face. Relief, maybe, or the particular gladness of a man who has just been let through a door he had no right to expect, made her look away, because it was more than she'd bargained for, and she wasn't ready to be seen seeing it. He rose, but he did not pull her anywhere. That was the first thing she noticed, and it surprised her. Every other man who had ever helped her had helped her towards something, steering, lifting, deciding. Silas only stood and waited, his hand light in hers, and let her bring her chair onto the floor under her own power. He walked beside the chair instead of behind it. When they reached the open parquet, he stopped and faced her, and for a moment the two of them were simply still in the middle of all that turning. I don't know your floor yet, he said, so you'll have to teach me as we go. You set the size of it. I'll follow. You'll follow. Her eyebrow went up, and she did not know it, but it was Della Mercer's own eyebrow, the says who eyebrow, and Silas felt the years swing under him like a deck. The man wants to follow. My mother led, he said simply. I learned it from the following side. I'm good at it. And then he began low, almost under his breath, to hum. It was the waltz from the music box, the little tin waltz, the 6 or 7 notes that climbed and bent and slowed, except in his low voice it did not bend flat and stop. It went on, the way the box never could, opening out into the whole melody his mother had hummed over the top of the broken spring on 1,000 cold, filling in by heart everything the dropped and dented tin had long since lost the strength to play. The orchestra was playing something else entirely, grand and full. But Silas wasn't dancing to the orchestra. He was dancing to the kitchen on Baymiller Street. And after a moment, because the two of them had found each other's rhythm without either one announcing it, so was she. He set his right hand lightly behind her shoulder, the lightest possible weight, a suggestion and not a grip. His left held her right. And then, slowly, asking permission with every degree of it, he turned, not the chair. With it, he stepped, and his hand behind her shoulder gave the smallest pressure, and Odessa's own hands found the wheel rims, and together they brought the chair around its own center in a long, clean arc, so that the whole of it, the man and the woman and the chair, and the dent in the tin over his heart, swept across the parquet as one turning thing. The wheels drew a circle on the floor the way another couple's feet would have. He leaned. She turned. Between the two of them, in the middle of a room 10,000 times the size of that kitchen, they made something that was unmistakably a dance. Odessa's breath caught, not at the spectacle of it. She had stopped letting room surprise her years ago, but at the competence. This was not a man improvising kindness. His hand knew where to be before the turn asked for it. His weight shifted to leave her the room to do her own part, rather than doing it for her. He did not, even once, try to push her. He was, she realized with something that felt dangerously like wonder, good at this. Not at dancing with a wheelchair, but at dancing with her, with this chair, on this floor, as if he had been doing some version of it his whole life. "Who taught you this?" she said. It was not quite a question. "I told you, my mother. Your mother." The chair came around again. Slow, sure. "And where did your mother learn to dance like this?" "I never asked her. Kids don't." Something moved across his face. "I've wondered every day since she died." 3 feet away, at the edge of the floor, Adelaide Cruz had risen from her high-backed chair. She had risen without her cane, which she had not done unaided in 2 years, and she did not notice she had done it. She was staring at the man and the woman turning slowly in the center of the floor, and her claret shawl had slipped from one shoulder, and her face had gone the white of old paper. Her lips moved. No sound came out. She took one step forward, and then another, her hand lifting toward them, as though to touch something that wasn't there. Because she knew that turn. She knew the particular way the man leaned to give the chair its center, while the woman in it gave it its motion. She knew the frame of his arms, the specific, unteachable angle of a hold designed not to hold someone up but to set them free. She had seen that turn exactly once before in 40 years of teaching movement in this city, on a different floor, danced by a young woman in a chair who had made the rest of them look like they were only walking around to music. She had spent a great many days since wondering what became of those hands. "That's Della's frame," Adelaide said. Out loud now, but to no one. "That is Della Mercer's frame." The name carried farther than she meant it to. Silas's feet did not stop, but everything else in him did. The hum died in his throat. He brought the chair through the last of its arc, gentle as setting down something asleep, and turned his head, and found an 80-year-old woman 3 feet away with both her hands pressed to her mouth and tears standing in her eyes. "Forgive an old woman," Adelaide whispered, "but I have to ask, that frame, that turn, where on God's earth did you learn it?" "From my mother." Silas's voice had gone careful, the voice of a man walking out onto ice he badly wants to hold, in a kitchen on Baymiller Street. "She passed 19 years ago." "Your mother." Adelaide's hand reached toward his face and stopped an inch short, trembling. "Child, what was your mother's name?" "Della," he said. "Della Mercer." The old woman made a sound that was not a word. It was older than words. She caught the back of a chair to keep her feet, and the tears spilled over and ran down into the powder she'd put on that afternoon, and she said, when she could say anything, "I taught her." 1979. A church hall on Lynn Street, a movement class for women the dance schools wouldn't take. She came in that chair, and I almost told her she'd be more comfortable watching. Adelaide laughed, wet and broken. More comfortable watching. Della Mercer. Inside a month she was teaching me. I have thought about her mother's hands every day of my life, young man, and I did not know until this second that she had a son, and I am looking at her hands right now. They're yours. You've got her hands. The floor had gone quiet around them, not all at once. Quiet spreads through a crowd like cold through water, table by table, the dancing trailing off as people stopped to understand why the people next to them had stopped. The orchestra played on a few bars into the silence, and then the first violinist saw what was happening and lowered his bow, and the music thinned to nothing, and there was only an old woman weeping at the edge of the floor, and a man on his knees beside a wheelchair, holding the hand of a woman who was staring at him as though the ground had moved. It was into this quiet that a man named Harlan Voss, the Trust's executive director, came pushing through the crowd with his face the color of ash. He had recognized the name before he saw the face, Della Mercer. He was one of exactly 2 people in that building who knew the thing that was about to come apart, and the other one was Wendell Pryor, and Harlan Voss had spent 6 years keeping a promise he had given to a voice on a telephone, a promise to never, under any circumstances, attach a name to the money. He had kept it through board meetings and donor dinners, and one very bad night when revealing it would have saved him a great deal of trouble. He had kept it because the man on the phone had asked him to, plainly, and because in 6 years that man had never once asked him for anything else. But the man on the phone was now on his knees on the parquet floor in worn boots, and an old woman was weeping his mother's name into a silent room. And Preston Walcott. Harlan could see him across the floor, recovering his footing, his host's smile, climbing back onto his face, was about to try to take control of a moment he did not understand. And Harlan Voss made a decision that he would never once regret, which was that some promises are kept best by breaking them out loud. "Mr. Mercer," Harlan said. His voice was not large, but the room was silent now, and it reached every corner. Silas closed his eyes for a half a second, the way a man does when a thing he has long protected slips out of his hands. "I'm sorry," Harlan said, and he meant it, and he said the rest of it to the whole room, because the whole room needed to hear it. "For 6 years I have kept your confidence, and I'll keep it no longer, because I won't stand in a room that's treated you like the help and let it go on believing that's what it saw." He turned so that he was speaking to the 300. "This is Silas Mercer. Some of you know the name from the side of a truck or the top of a building. What none of you know, what I was asked in writing never to tell you, is that the largest single donor to this trust every year for 6 years, giving more than this entire room combined and asking for nothing, not a plaque, not a seat, not a thank you, is the man you've been handing your empty glasses to all night." A sound moved through the crowd, 300 people inhaling at once. "And the program he funds," Harlan went on, and now his voice did break, just slightly. "The one some of you heard described tonight as a hobby that's outlived its usefulness. The music class on the west side, the one whose funding was set to be quietly moved on Monday morning. He has paid for that, in full, anonymously, since the day he learned this building once turned a woman in a wheelchair away at the door because there was no ramp to let her in." Harlan looked at Adelaide, at the tears on her face, and understanding arrived in him visibly, terribly. "I never knew who she was. I don't think Mr. Mercer ever told a soul. But I'd put my life on knowing now." Adelaide Cruz said it because someone had to, and because she had earned it across 40 years. It was Della. She was looking at Silas, and she was smiling through the ruin of her face. 1981, the spring gala. I brought her myself. They stopped us at the steps. There was no way up that a chair could take, and the man at the door said it wasn't his to fix, and I took my friend home, and we did not speak of it again. She pressed her hand to her chest. "Your mother never came back to this hall, Silas. Not once in her life, a breath. And you built her a ramp and gave away a fortune so it would never happen to anybody else, and you didn't put her name on it. You didn't put it anywhere. She didn't do things to be known," Silas said, very low, and only the nearest few heard it, and it was the only thing he trusted himself to say. Across the floor, Preston Walcott found his voice, because men like Preston Walcott always find their voice, and it is always a beat too late and a register too thin. "Well," he said, with a laugh that was meant to gather the room back to him and gathered no one, "this is quite a production, very moving. Although I gently remind everyone that we don't actually know," he spread his hands, reasonable, a man calling for sense. "I mean, this is all very theatrical, isn't it? A man in work boots, a long-lost dance teacher, a tearful reveal. One does wonder if it isn't a touch arranged for the cameras." He had seen the phones come up around the room. "I only think we should be careful about Preston." Harlan Voss did not even raise his voice. "On Monday morning, you were going to move $1.2 million of this man's money out of a children's program and into a building your own company is contracted to construct. I have the agreement in my office. I'd think very hard about the next thing you say." The silence that followed had a different quality. It was the silence of 300 people recalculating, all at once, everything they had spent the evening being certain of. And in the middle of it, Silas Mercer was not looking at Walcott, or at Harlan, or at the phones, or at the ruin of the careful anonymity he had kept for 6 years. He was looking at Odessa, who had not let go of his hand. His eyes were wet. He was not a man who could keep that from happening, and had stopped, long ago, being ashamed of it. But under the wet there was something more complicated, something that looked almost like guilt, and she saw it, because she had spent a lifetime learning to read faces at her eye level. "What?" she said quietly. just for him. Why do you look like that? You should be. She searched for it. You just got handed the whole room. I was standing against that wall a long time before I crossed it, Silas said. His thumb moved once unconsciously to the dent in the tin in his pocket. Watching them leave you at the edge. Telling myself I was watching to learn something. He shook his head. Took me 4 refusals to get up, Odessa. My mother would have been up at the first. The video reached the city before Odessa Hale did. A woman at table 6 had filmed the whole of it, had lifted her phone the moment Silas knelt, on instinct the way people do now, and had kept filming through the dance and the old woman's tears and Harlanvasis saying a name into a silent room. She posted it that night with 4 words. I was there. Real. By morning it had been watched 200,000 times. By the time Odessa unlocked the door of the church basement on Monday to teach a spring term she had spent the weekend, assuming was canceled, it had passed 4 million, and there were 2 television vans parked on Liberty Street, and a reporter from the Inquirer sitting on the steps with a cup of gas station coffee, waiting to ask her how it felt. How does what feel? Odessa said, and rolled past him and unlocked the door because there were children coming at 4 o'clock and the floor needed sweeping. What she had not done all weekend was call Silas Mercer. She had his number. He'd written it on the back of the cheap certificate before he left the hall Saturday night. Not the office number, not an assistant's, his own, and slid it under her hand without a word, and gone out the side door he'd come in by, away from the phones, before the room could turn its full attention on him. She had looked at those 10 digits a long time, and she had not called, because somewhere in the noise of Saturday night a single fact had lodged in her like a splinter, and would not work itself out. The money that taught her kids, that kept the lights on, that bought the little half-sized cellos and the bus passes. All of it, for 6 years, had been his. She had built her whole life on a floor he had quietly laid under her, and she had not known, and the not knowing made her feel like one more of his good deeds, the very thing she'd sworn at him on the dance floor she would not be. He called her Tuesday. She let it ring twice and answered. I'm not going to thank you, she said before he could speak. There was a pause, and then, to her surprise, a low, warm sound that she realized was a laugh. Good, Silas said. I'd have thought less of you. I mean it. I've spent 2 days furious at you, and I worked out why, so you're going to hear it. She gripped the phone. You put a floor under me for 6 years and never told me. You let me think I'd built it. And maybe you meant that as a kindness, letting me keep my dignity, but a thing you do for somebody without telling them isn't dignity, Silas. It's just a nicer kind of being managed. I run that program. Me, if you and I are going to be, whatever this is, you don't get to manage me from behind a holding company ever again. The silence on the line was long enough that she wondered if she'd ended it before it started. You're right, Silas said at last, and there was no defensiveness in it, only something that sounded like relief. That's exactly right, and nobody's said it to me in 20 years because nobody could see well enough to say it. My mother would have said it the first week. A breath. So I won't ask you to thank me. I'll ask you something harder. Come build the next part with me, out loud, with your name on it, not as somebody I'm helping. As the person who knows how it's actually done, which I don't. I only know how to write the check. What next part? I'll show you Thursday, he said. We're something you can move in. The Riverbend Arts Trust held an emergency session of its board on Wednesday evening, and it did not last long. Harlan Voss had spent Monday and Tuesday doing the unglamorous work that undoes men like Preston Walcott, pulling the funding agreement, the contractor filings, the chain of 2 holding companies, and a cousin's signature that connected the Heritage Wing to Walcott Development. He laid it on the table without a speech. The clause granting the chairman sole discretion to reallocate program funds sat highlighted on page 11, and beside it the construction bid, and beside that the bank, and the board members looked at the 3 documents the way you look at a thing you should have seen a long time ago. Walcott tried. He was good at trying. It was most of what he was. He spoke of vision, and of hard choices, and of the difference between sentiment and stewardship, and for a few minutes the old authority was almost back in the room. But authority is a kind of credit, and his had come due all at once, and when the vote came it was not close. They removed him as chairman. They voided the reallocation. They referred the contractor matter to council. He did not shout. That was the thing the others remembered. He gathered his folio and his good coat, and he walked out of the boardroom alone, down the long marble hall, past the framed photographs of every gala the trust had ever thrown, and there was no one waiting for him at the end of it, and no one came after. He had spent his whole life making sure he was the most important man in every room he entered. He left the last one exactly the way he had left a woman in a green dress at the edge of a dance floor, unaccompanied, unregarded, walking past 100 people who had decided, all at once and without coordinating it, that he was not worth crossing the room for. If he understood the symmetry of it, he gave no sign. Men like Preston Walcott rarely do. On Thursday, Silas took Odessa to the Eden Park Music Hall. It was empty, mid-morning, the chandeliers dark, the great floor swept and bare and full of gray river light from the tall windows. Wendell Pryor let them in, and then made himself scarce with the tact of a man who had spent 11 years knowing when to disappear. Silas walked Odessa out to the center of the parquet, where they had danced, and he told her what he wanted to build. He called it the Della Cercer Open Floor Initiative. $40 million to start. Not a building with a name on a wall. He was firm about that, almost fierce. The only time all morning his voice got away from him. But a fund to tear out the steps and lay the ramps, to widen the doors and lower the stages, to turn the music halls and the dance studios and the community rooms of the city, one by one, into places where no one would ever again be stopped at the threshold and told it wasn't anyone's job to fix. And threaded through all of it, full and permanent funding for the program in the church basement, $6 million in a standing endowment, so that no future chairman with a clever clause could ever move it again. Every floor in this city, he said, with room on it for whoever they used to leave outside. That's the whole of it. That's the only idea I've got. It's my mother's idea, he added after a moment. I just finally had the money to say it out loud. Odessa was quiet for a long time, turning slowly in the center of the empty floor, looking up at the dark chandeliers her mother in spirit had been turned away beneath in 1981. I have conditions, she said. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. I run the West End program, not a board, not you. Me and the parents, the way it's always been. She counted them off, unhurried. Your name comes off it and stays off. It's hers, not yours, and not mine. The kids who use chairs design the spaces. Listen, I'm not laying a single ramp without a 14-year-old in a chair telling me where it goes wrong. And the first hesitation, you and I do the asking, together, in every room you've been buying your way out of being seen in. You don't get to write the check and vanish out the side door anymore. If we do this, you stand in the middle of the floor where people can see you. Like you finally did Saturday. That's the cost. That's a steep cost, Silas said. That's the cost. Done, he said, and held out his hand. And she took it, and this time it was a handshake, two people closing a deal as equals on an empty floor, and it was somehow more intimate than the dance had been. He reached into his jacket then, and took out the little tin music box, dented on its one corner, and he turned it over once in his hands, and he held it out to her. I want this to live at the program, he said. On a shelf where the kids can wind it. 3 half turns, no more. It can't take more, the spring's old. His voice was steady, but only just. My mother carried it her whole life. It's the first floor I ever danced on. It ought to be where the dancing is. Odessa looked at the small, worn thing in his open palm, and she understood what it was costing him, and she did not reach for it right away, because some gifts you honor by not grabbing. On one condition, she said softly. You and your conditions. You come wind it sometimes. It's not a donation, Silas. It's a key. You don't hand somebody a key and then stay outside the door. He laughed, the wet kind, and pressed it into her hands and closed her fingers around it. They danced again that autumn, on the first anniversary in that same hall, in front of that same orchestra, with Adelaide Cruz in the front row in her claret shawl, standing this time, the whole song through, and the autumn after that, and the one after that, until it became the thing the city expected, The encore the room asked for every year. The man in the better boots now, but the same 9-year-old shirt, humming under his breath a tune the orchestra never could quite name, and the woman in the chair leading him through a turn no standing couple ever matched. She never rose from the chair, not once in any of the years. That was never the point, and anyone who watched them understood it inside a measure. She was not dancing in spite of the chair. She was dancing, and the chair was part of how, and it was the most beautiful thing on the floor. On the third anniversary, when the music ended and the room was still finding its breath, Silas knelt down beside her the way he had the first night, to be at her eye level, and he said something the orchestra covered and the cameras missed, something low, just for her. "What?" he asked. No one else heard. "What?" she answered. She kept turning over in her hands long after, the way you hold a key you haven't yet decided which door it opens. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She said, "Ask me again next autumn on this floor." And she was smiling when she said it, and so was he, and the orchestra was already rising into the encore. The room would not let them leave without. Some floors you're handed. Most of us spend our lives waiting at the edge of one, hoping to be asked. But every so often, a person walks across the room when no one expects it of them, and you learn the floor was never the gift. The crossing was. It always was.